Good morning. Welcome to lecture 7 of the lecture series Historical Linguistics, focusing on Middle High German. And today's topic is language and gender. I think the Renner by Hugo von Trimberg is a very interesting example where grammatical gender and birth, gender, sex overlap because it's structured by the vices, and vices as well as virtues are feminine, grammatically feminine, and so the visual structuring of the manuscript of Der Renner is done by the personification of these vices. You see here on the right hand side Tragheit, laziness, sloth, and the tradition that all virtues and vices are feminine goes back to antiquity, because in the classical languages also the abstract nouns are formed by female suffixes, which then determine the gender, the grammatical gender of the nouns as being feminine. And so you will be familiar with the concept of justitia from Latin antiquity, justice, pictured as the woman with a blindfolded eyes and the scales in her hand. So here the concept of justice, anything that is a concept, is pictured as a woman. And if you then have virtues such as Tapferkeit, to be brave, you come to a conflict between the physical shape and the attributes. So how to put a woman into armor. It's the only instance throughout antiquity and the Middle Ages where armed women are a positive thing if they represent the positive virtue of being brave. But Der Renner features less virtues and more vices here. So sloth is shown as sitting on a donkey, and devil is pushing a bolster under her head to make her more comfortable, because she can't be bothered to take any exercise or do any physical exertion. And so if you look through the vices that structure Der Renner, Hochfahrt, die Hochfahrt, Gietigkeit, die Gietigkeit. A difference is then Fraß, because here the single word Fraß is used rather than the abstract Fräßigkeit, which would be female. So der Fraß, but definitely die Unküchi. And here you still have the originally Old High German abstract form of having an I ending, a long I, turning the adjective unküsch into the noun unküschi. So Unkeuschheit, inchastity, which is a loan translation from Latin, not to be chaste. Need and Zorn, equally masculine, because not an abstract ending has been used, but then Trägheit, as we have seen already, has this ending. And the endings of height and kite are actually originally separate Old High German words. So height means to have the substance of something. So the development goes from der geht, the der Geiz, to then the adjective gietig, to be full of avarice, and then from this adjective with a new abstract ending height to have the substance of Gietigkeit is formed. And the abstract ending kite is just a misrepresentation of the height ending when it meets up with a plosive, the k at the end of the adjective. So Gietigkeit becomes Gietigkeit, and it's wrongly chopped up into different syllables. If you want to know more about these forms of abstract nouns, I would recommend looking at an internet resource I built up now 2 decades ago with my students at Tübingen University, Althochdeutscher Bedeutungsbaukasten, where we were looking at the different syllables to for word formation. So in Der Renner we have 2 forms of women, the real physical women, which are used as first part of the Pride chapter, Hochfahrt chapter. We had been looking last week at the structure of the secular people, which are divided up according to class, and then there comes the section of spiritual people being divided between priests and monks. But so the division between men and women is thought even more fundamental. So before the world of men is divided up, first the women are siphoned off and being made as the prominent target of didactic structure. And the justification for that is taken from the story of the fall of Adam and Eve that we had seen, where Eve first takes the apple and then Adam also has a bite. So in the same way, Hugo von Trimberg first chastises women and then men, and then differentiates the world according to men. But intersecting with that is the structure by these allegorical women, and because of German grammar being ruled with the pronouns also referring back to the grammatical gender, we come to a lot of forms of female nouns. And I'll first take you through the beginning of the chapter on Geiz, so avarice, which Hugo has after the chapter on Hochmut, pride. So pride comes before the fall. And he explains, nu han ich ein Teil gerührt, dir Hochfahrt, und doch nicht vollführt alles, das sie angehört. So because of pride being grammatically female, the reference back to the vice is always in the female form, other than in English, where you wouldn't refer to pride as she or he, despite it being a personification. You would always refer back to it as it. I would have to check with native speakers whether the same is true for personifications where the image is still vivid, such as justice, which is still linked to the image of Justitia with the scales and with the physical features of a woman. But I think you would still refer back to justice as it. I'll ask the group after the lecture how they would feel about the grammatical or the inherent characteristics of these nouns in English. So Hugo says he can't really completely discuss all of pride's inherent characteristics, because otherwise he would have had to destroy everything, since pride is to be found in Bürge, Dörfer und Städte mit den Klöstern, aus der Wette ihr Ross heimlich trinkend. So Hochfahrt obviously rides on a horse, while Gietigkeit just rides on a dog. Since pride is associated with being, as we've seen in the fable of the mule, with a courtly sphere and wanting to ride on courtly animals. So the horses of pride like to drink out of the waters, both of the secular dwellings and also of the monastic dwellings, despite of being told off with a wagging of fingers, Sphäre, die Finger winken. Die Hochfahrt las ich belieben und will ein wenig schrieben von ihr Gespielen, der Gietigkeit. So the group of vices is imagined as a play group, like a hen party, out to destroy everything in their wake. The image of Gietigkeit from the Stockholm manuscript is quite fun. If you look at her, she is kitted out in the latest courtly fashion with Schnabelschuhen, so shoes that are pointed at the end, with a clutch bag, or it's not quite a clutch bag, it's she has it on a little hanging belt, but she has a very tightly bound taille. So this had been in the 14th century the newest fashion, to have tightly tailored dresses, which had become possible through the invention of buttons. So you could make shaped dresses, and the belt is really tight to indicate her tight-fistedness, so in this kind of way a tight-chestedness, and she's also squeezing the doggy's mouth to indicate this kind of tight squeeze on everything. Anyway, so she is this playmate of pride, and she has her own entourage. So we had seen pride has the whole group of horses that are on pasture everywhere, and Avarice has an even wider entourage, and it's the longest section in Hugo von Trimberg's text, because it was something he felt personally very passionate about as an underpaid schoolmaster, constantly on the lookout for more money and feeling hard done by the clergy who wasn't paying him enough. So her Schar is something that you have together, brought together, so her followers, ist so groß und so breit, dass sie niemand gezählen kann. Wann sie hat Wieb und Mann so gar an sich gewonnen, dass Meere in ihren Brunnen birren, fallend alle Tage, denn auf den Dorn, Gott ich es klage. So he refers back to this opening scene of the pear allegory, where some pears fall into the thorn, which is the symbol of pride, and others fall into the well, which he now classifies as her well, namely that of Avarice. And now he unfolds a whole chord of women. I haven't glossed all of them, but we'll go through these. And as I said at the beginning, you can form any new abstract idea by just adding the ending heit to an existing adjective. So if you have the adjective böse, you get the Bosheit. You could do that even with newfangled words nowadays in German. So if you want to say ich bin chilled out, you can have a chilledheit, and everybody would still understand. So the word formation is still an active feature with these abstract endings. So Gietigkeit, Avarice, hat Alters eine, has from long ago, mit aller Missetat gemeint. So she has a common denominator with all misdeeds. Here, Missetat is also a feminine gender, not because of word formation syllable, but because of a compound between like in English, misdeed, and a word for the noun for doing, tat. And tat in itself is one of the old abstract nouns. So it was tati in Old High German, the thing that is done. And hence also feminine. Bosheit ist ihr Kammererin, so her chambermaid. And this is an interesting example now, this whole list: Kammererin, Kellnerin, Ratgebin, Haarflechterin, because of the argument raging in Germany about the generic masculine, where the conservatives argue you don't need a feminine ending because the masculine is already all encompassing. But here clearly it's distinguished between female and male forms, and there is a clear sense that even in traditionally male occupations like Truchsess, so the Truchsess is the steward, Keje is at the court of Arthur, the Truchsess, so the one that looks after all the belongings, a bit like steward of senior cum room in an Oxford college. And here it's clearly not working out to just have the generic form truchsess, but Hugo van Trimberg wants to stress the female nature of these personification. So you have a kind of tree structure of vice, with avarice as the overarching vice, and then the sub-vices like subdeans, Bosheit, so evilness, Kargheit, and here we see that what I mentioned before, that the ending heit, when it meets up with a guttural plosive k or g, is merged to kite. So the full form would be kalk and then hyphen heit, but it's amalgamated to kalkheit. Kalkheit also means to be mean with food. And so you have somebody who is squeezing out the food as Kellnerin, as the serving maid. Untreue, so unloyalty, is ihr, and that's a nice courtly office, Haarflechterin, the one who plats the hair of Avarice, and you can see that she has quite a tightly wound curls on her head. If you look at the image from the Straßburg manuscript. Lirgen, Triergen, mag wohl sien, ihr Schenkin und ihr Truchsessin. So to lie and to trick could be called her Schenkin. So der Schenke is the person who serves the drinks to the king. Joseph in Genesis is becomes the Schenke of the Pharao, and the Truchsessin, as I had mentioned, the one who looks after all the belongings, the kind of chattels fellow of Avarice. Unwirde is ihr Spießerin, so unworthiness is the one who looks after her food provision. Smächen, ihr Ärmelprieserin. That's a particularly nice neologism of Hugo. So smächen is to schmeicheln, to flatter somebody. So to flatter her is the job of the woman who praises her sleeves. And you have this fashion for long sleeves, which in English you have the song Green Sleeves, where somebody is obsessed by the long green sleeves of the woman. And we have to imagine there the image isn't that good because it doesn't have these long courtly sleeves. I should find another image of Avarice with the long sleeves, because clearly this is the part that is the most excessive in nature, because it doesn't have a real proper function to dress somebody. It's just an excess of cloth to show off. Spal Helbelink der Pforten flickt. So Spal Helbelink is also a neologism, and it's one of the abstract nouns that actually is an imperative, a command. So spar den Heller, so save up the pennies, with a and link is one of the few abstract suffixes that are male. So you have now a few male people in the entourage, but they follow after this long list of high office holders who are female. So Save the Penny looks after the gates. Würfelsack das Görig wieget. So that is somebody who ties up the bags of money, and this has the position to weigh Görig, and I must admit I forgot to look up Görig. I think it's a spice, an expensive spice that is carefully weighed not to waste money. Ihr Marschalk ist Herr Zitterort, ihr Buttigler Herr Bitterwort. These are all made up new offices and compounds by Hugo von Trimberg. Marschalk is you will know it from the Nibelungenlied. It's originally the Schalk, the servant who looks after the Mal, the horses, and it becomes then the army general, and that is one Mr. Zitterort. I'm not sure, and neither does Grimm know what it really meant, is meant by this dither place. It's probably somebody who always hesitates and protracts paying for things. Buttigler is related to butler, so this is somebody who looks actually after the butter, which might seem strange, but in Oxford colleges you still have the buttery book, which takes all the costs for living and food. And this is somebody who will give out bitter words, so trying to scare people off from claiming expenses. Ungunst, that's again a female abstract noun, namely somebody who is mistrusting and not kindly dispositioned towards anybody. And this person, a woman clerk here, is writing the bills. And Niedung is a male ending, again, ung for to enforce the sense of night, to envy. So Mr. Envy is her chaplain. So you have this whole imaginary court led by the Avarice as queen with the different court positions. And then as first example for the way in which these different mechanisms of avarice play out, the ein Beispiel is told of ein Sünderin. In the East Franconian dialect in which Hugo von Trimberg writes, the unbestimmte Artikel in the female form eine is always reduced to ein. So it looks the ein as if it's masculine or feminine, masculine and neutral, but it's also used for the feminine form. So ein Sünderin in standard Middle High German would be eine Sünderin. And the story is told here, ein Biest will ich vernommen haben, das muss ich ziehen daherin. So I've heard of a story, an exemplary story, like Beispiel in modern German, which I have to insert at this point. Zehnmal, once upon a time, saß ein Sünderin für einen Priester und tät ihr Beichte. So she did her confession. Und machte ihr Seele von Sünden lichte and relieved her soul from sin. Lichte, leicht in modern German. Do sie gebeichte gar lüterlich, do begunde sie süfzen inniglich und sprach, so when she was lauter, so pure, with pure intent, confessing, she started sighing, seufzen in modern German, und sprach, viel lieber Herr min, möchte es mit ihrem Urlaub sehen, dass ich ein Sünde nicht beichten sollte, gern ich dar fasten wollte und geben mines Gurtes, was ihr hierset, dass ihr der Sünden mich erlieset, wenn ich dazu große Angst han. So she asks for the Urlaub, the concession, not to have to confess one particular sin. She offers that she would do fasting if she just didn't have to name this unspeakable sin. And note, following our lecture last week, that she is Irzen, the priest, as a sign of respect, but that correlates to the singular der Herr, but the plural form as a form of formal address. Sprach, viel Liebe, nu sagt an, wer ein Sünde wissentlich verswiege, der muss ewiglich verloren sein, da immer. But he tells her, dearest, now tell me, because whoever keeps one sin silent will be lost forever because of that. Die Frau versuchte mannige Krümme, wie sie die Missetat Züge. So she's looking for ways around, krumme Wege, dass sie den Priester doch nicht trüge, without deceiving the priest. Zu Jungest sprach sie mit großer Klage, Herre, an einem Frietage gieng ich und min Knecht und ein Magget nachs Lehen, dass sie ügesaget. So one Friday, so the day when you should be fasting, to remember Good Friday, she went with her servants to look for sloes. So these little black, very sour fruits that grow on hedges along the way. You have sloe gin, but it's not used for much other things because it's so bitter and little tasty. Du wollte ich, armü Sünderin, dir's Lehen versuchen und schaub ihr ihn drie nacheinander, die ich versland, ehe denn mir leider würde bekannt, dass ich min Fasten het gebrochen. So she ate 3 sloes without realizing that it meant she had broken her fast. Dass dis Gott lasse ungerochen, Herre, an mir, das sollt ihr bitten. So she asked the priest to do intercession for her with God, that he doesn't take revenge for this involuntarily breaking of the fast. which is clearly one of the most small sins you can think of, just accidentally breaking a fast with something as unsavory as a slow. And so the priest tries to figure out whether that's really all she is doing wrong. So der Priester sprach mit sanften Sitten, spulget ihr ich Flurchen und Schelten, das mannige Frauen miedend selten, or don't you ever curse or schelten, use hard words, because that is typical for many. And Frauen still has the connotation of noble, high-born women rather than women. And he also uses the courteous ihr towards the women rather than the du, which would indicate that she was from a lower class. She answers, ja, Herre, Sven, ich bin ungemurt und mir min Herre, ich leides tut, so sprich ich, dass der Teufel fahr ihm in dir blatten und ihn gar zerriese und zerzerre. So, yes, my lord, whenever I feel hard done by and my man, mein Herre, does something bad towards me, then I say, if only the devil fahr ihm in die Blatten. A Blatte is the patch of hair that is taken off, related to Platte in modern German, to form a bald patch for clergy, so priests that have taken vows are shorn of their hair. And so she implies with this, referring to the Platte of her hair, that she is actually liaising with a somebody who has taken clerical vows. Er sprach, Frauwe, wen gehört ihr an? So, and he addressed her, lady, so to whom do you belong? And she answers, den Pfarrer, Herre, mit dem ich haben wohl 7 Kind und gehen jetzund mit einem. So, I belong, dear Lord, to the priest with whom I have 7 children and I'm expecting the 8th. Ich gehe jetzt mit einem weiteren, so. Er sprach, ich nehme 1 Pfund und bürse die Slehen an eure Stadt, zwir groß doch sie die Missetat, bürset ihr den Pfaffen und auch die Kind. So he tries to put it in perspective and says, I'll take upon my conscience the sin with a slow, but you have to to repent for having had sex with a priest and actually having children with him. And Hugo's reasoning for it is, mannig Mensch ist leider noch so blind, dass es eine große Missetat für eine kleine Sünde hat. So many people are unfortunately as blind that they take a great misdeed for a little sin. And then comes his tertium comparationis, the comparator with Avarice, where he started off. Allsam tuert du Gietigkeit, du hat ihr selbes Unseligkeit, nicht für große Missetat und trägt fälschlich der Tugende ward. So he accuses Avarice of looking deceptively like a virtue of being not full of food and to waste money, but in fact it's a vice in dressing up as a virtue. And so it goes throughout the whole Renner that all the system of vices is visualized and pictured as women. So here in the Heidelberg manuscript, I have a typo here, it's manuscript, where the Unkeuschheit starts, Unkeuschheit in chastity, in Latin called luxuria. It states on the left-hand side, unkeusch glüht als ein Glut. So ihr Zuchtmutter ist Geitigkeit. So what we've just seen here on the Geiz, and from the Geiz comes the next vice, namely not to be chaste. And then on it starts listing all the properties of Unkeuschheit. Unkeusch glüht als ein Glut, wohl ihm, der vor ihr ist, beruht. So the manuscript is early 15th century, 1425, so that already has all a new High German diphthongization, Unkeusch instead of Unküche. But I want to come back now briefly to the real women instead of the just grammatically women, and to show how the kind of generalizations developed when describing vices are then projected onto the sex of women. So something that is developed as a grammatical category becomes here a property of real life people. He starts his section on women. So you remember the first category of Hochfahrt with a saying that we have encounter in lots of medieval text. It's, for example, in Freidank, a collection of proverbs, but it's also quoted in several courtly romances. Kurzen Murt und langes Haar haben die Mäide sunderbar. So women have short Murt and long hair, a kind of inverse relationship between what is on the head and what is in the head. And this is a kind of misogynist trope that occurs again and again. And then he describes how they fall into this particular trap, and it's all because of being besotted by men and having to choose between them. It starts as soon as they have reached a certain age, die zu ihr Tagen kommen sind. Die Wahl machet ihn das Herze blind. Die Augen zeigen ihn den Weg, von den Augen geht ein Steck zu dem Herzen, nicht gar lang, auf den stieget mannig Gedank, wen sie nehmen oder nicht. So the image is of a kind of highway of sin going in via the eyes towards the heart, and then from the heart comes up again the thought whom they want to take. O wie dicke das Geschicht, das Genurge besitzen von der Wahl, die sie haben ahne Zahl. This is zum ersten ihr Gedanke. And then he lists all the thoughts that go in his projection through the head of women who fall for men. And this system of thought production, which he describes, is quite interesting if we link it up with a medieval notion of the senses as feeders for the thought process. And you have on the left-hand side the pathways from the eye into the brain marked up. You see from the eyes, it goes to the imaginatio, here above the right-hand eye. And this is linked with the estimativa sense, this sense of to esteem something. It's also linked to the thought process cogitativa, vel imaginatio, and then vis memorativa, and that it's confined to the memory. And you have this little animal that goes in through the ear by hearing something, and combining it with what is seen, it's confined to the memory. And then it's reproduced into, so now we have to imagine also the path down to the heart and then back up again. The right one is slightly more crudely executed, but also adds in the further senses beyond the seeing and hearing. It also has the tasting with a stuck out tongue. You have the olfactus, so the sense of smell, and all these combine to link up to the fantasia, the fantasizing, and in the case of women, it's always fantasizing about men, as Hugo von Trimberg claims. Since last week, one of the students particularly liked the Schinkenklatschen, the play, game playing on the lawn. I've brought another image with game playing. This one on the bottom right-hand side of the Heidelberg manuscript, picturing inchastity, shows blinde Kuh-Spiel. So somebody has the head pulled over his eyes and has to catch somebody else. And on the right-hand side, the boy has already caught the girl. Above there, you have an old woman called Bärentreiberin, in the clutches of the devil. So she is the one who is linking up the young woman with a young man, and the young woman with a flower wreath is called gekrönte Eselin. And here money changes hands between man and woman, and altogether they make up the sin of inchastity. I won't read through all of the women's folly and their consideration, what characteristics are desirable in young men, which makes a really long list. I want to finish with an early New High German text, which summarizes the ideal characteristics of women by Hans Sachs. And he puts together this catalogue by going through the Old Testament, starting with Eve, and taking each of the women as characterizing one virtue. But together they make quite an oppressive reading of what is the main duty and characteristic of women. So he starts with Eve, whose main virtue he sees in her giving birth as mother of all being. So he has as caption for each of these sections an adjective attached to the name and then a Bible chapter given. So following from the curse of Eve, that she has to give birth in pain, he deduces that this is also her virtue, that she can give birth, Eva, die gebärend. What is interesting is here I've marked in yellow the references to Eve as ein Weib, and das Weib is grammatically neuter and not feminine, but he ignores this and overrides it with referring back to her as sie. Eva, die, was ein Weib Adam aus seiner Seiten sie Gott nahm. So grammatically it would have been perfectly possible to say aus seiner Seiten es Gott nahm, because it actually points back to grammatically to ein Weib. And Hugo von Trimberg had always used the grammatical gender of the personification as feminine to have all the feminine pronouns. And he could also have kind of dissociated the grammatical gender and the real gender of abstract nouns as neither men nor women, but he chose actually the visualization potential of the grammatical gender to keep it. Here you see it the other way around. It doesn't work. Hans Sachs is determined to link it all, pinpoint it back to the women, both grammatically and ontologically, as it were. Then he summarizes, Eva, die war ein Weib, Adam aus seiner Seiten, sie Gott nahm, segnet sie und macht sie fruchtbar, zu erfüllen die Erden gar. In der Unschuld stund sie nicht lang, sie ward betrogen durch die Schlangen, durch sie ging in die Welt der Tod. Darum straft sie, der Herr Gott, dass sie in Schmerzen sollt gebären, Adam ganz untertänig werden. Also ward Eva, wie man findet, ein Mutter aller Menschenkind. Hans Sachs is also Franconian, so the same that I said about Hugo. Eine is shortened to ein with Apokope is here. But it's feminine, eine Mutter. Also ein Weib ist hier auf Erden geordnet, Kinder zu geben, so sie mit Glauben ist geziert, durch Gebären sie selig wird. So again, Hans Sachs could have said so es, and it would have been grammatically clear that it relates back to ein Weib, but he wants to enforce the notion of women. And then I've given you the whole range of adjectives that is typical for late medieval misogynist take on women, even in the guise of a praise for women. They are kept to very certain areas of life. So she can only be gütig, treu, vernünftig, mäßig, sanftmütig und keusch. And if you were to compare it with a similar overview of men, it would be quite a different picture. All right, next week we'll look at dialect, so I'll explain a bit more about Franconian. I'll stop recording and ask about the properties of virtues and vices in English.